What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Bro History. It's Henry Zamoda, and we have Danny Abdeljabbar. It kind of looks like from here you have been maintaining your beard a little bit more than usual, have you? Or no?
Yeah.
Am I just making that up?
Yeah, no, I've been straightening it. You know, it's just something that I like to do when I'm bored. Just straighten it.
Straighten it.
Yeah,
You know,
I've got a comb and everything.
do you use special beard shampoo?
No, but I have special beard wax and oils.
Oh. It seems like too much maintenance. See, where I'm at
Not
right
really.
now, I haven't shaved in about 5 to 6 days, and I'm at to the point where my face, I start scratching like I'm Tyrone Biggins. So I need to shave probably tonight before I go to bed. Like this is only I can grow the beard. I just can't handle the inconvenience and how
You can't handle the beard.
You can't handle it. You may it's one thing to grow a beard, but you got to handle that motherfucker.
Right.
I can't do it. My face is too sensitive. But it's looking good. Next episode, you should come out with like a full plunge Johnny Depp Pirates of the Caribbean type of like braids in your beard.
I can do it. And I also have.
Why not? It would
I've
be
been.
hilarious.
I've been Captain Jack Sparrow for Halloween once. So, if you remember, actually, you probably wouldn't remember that. That was before we met. But yeah, I can probably do that. Should I do one of the podcasts, just like do random live stream in one of the random ridiculous costumes that I do?
Yeah, I'll dress up like Tarzan. I still have a costume. I still have my Tarzan costume. You know what everyone should do?
What?
For these face masks. So when you go outside, instead of wearing like the surgeon mask or
Just wear a
scarf,
Halloween mask?
Just wear a Halloween mask.
That counts,
so
right?
That counts. It covers your face. So whenever if you walk outside and you run to the grocery store, everyone's like, there's a Freddy Krueger, there's a werewolf, there's a vampire. There's
love
like
this idea.
Pinhead. There's
Yeah.
Pinhead. There's some Resident Evil character. There's zombies, and then when aliens look down on Earth and they're like, recently there have been UFO sightings, right?
Yep, that's true. A lot of them
When they're monitoring us, they'll be like, "Oh, look, it's a planet full of monsters. I guess we won't invade."
Well, depending on what the aliens
There's
look
Dracula.
like, depending on what the aliens look like, they might already think we look like monsters. So
Specimens is probably the correct term.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, let's get started. Thanks for anyone who's joining us right now. We're doing this podcast live. It's Thursday right now. It's Thursday night, so we usually do these on Wednesdays. But we both got held up, and honestly, we didn't really have too much time to catch up on the news. But the first thing I wanted to bring up before we jumped into some of the main topics is just some some updates on things in the Middle East that we've been talking about. I don't know if you saw today, but Lebanon's economy crashed today.
yeah, you were telling me about that earlier.
So I guess the Ponzi scheme that pegged the Lebanese pound to the U.S. dollar has finally fallen apart, and the government they came out with their economic data, and their GDP, I think, decreased by 6.9% in the last year, and then they expect it to decrease this year by 13.8%.
Whoa.
And 48% of the people who live in Lebanon are underneath the poverty line, the Lebanese poverty line. And you know what's funny? There was protests all year, or all of last year, the end of last year. There was these raging protests, and they were peaceful protests. They weren't riots where people were killing each other. However, this is something that was going on. Like, did you see any of those videos where these protests would be like a bunch of people dancing and like twerking?
Yeah,
In
totally.
Lebanon?
Yeah.
They seemed kind of fun.
Yeah.
But now everyone, I guess,
It's not
had
fun
to
anymore.
go back indoors for coronavirus, and now we're now, since things are a little bit like the lockdown is less restrictive, people are going out to protest again. But I guess essentially what happened is that, what's going to happen is that they're going to be forced to take an IMF loan, and their pound fell from $1.50 per US to now below $4.
Whoa.
So essentially, if you had money in a Lebanese bank, you probably lost all of your money.
If you're listening to this show and you had money in a Lebanese bank,
well, something that's interesting about Lebanon is that Lebanon has a really big diaspora.
Yeah, for sure.
Because of the Lebanese Civil War in the 80s. And there's a lot of people who have money, like Lebanese people who are either in Canada or America or Europe who have their money in Lebanese banks. So it's going to hit those people. But yeah, it's just, I mean, this is something that's been escalated because of COVID-19, but they were having economic problems prior to this. But I found it interesting. If you guys are interested, I know there's a lot of people who are interested in like the Federal Reserve who listen to this podcast. I would do researching on that because a lot of it has to do with their federal banking system,
right,
that they have in place. But another interesting thing that happened in that area is that in Iraq, they chose their new prime minister today.
Yep, heard that too.
So
what was the guy's name again?
So Mustafa al-Kadhimi, who is, I guess he's kind of a technocrat he has a skilled background. I honestly don't know that much about him. However, what was interesting to me is that I saw two supporting tweets, and two people support this guy, and one is Mike Pompeo, and then the other comes from Iran. So it seems that he's in I mean, the U.S. and Iran actually backed this guy, which is nothing new, given the last 20 years of Middle Eastern history of the U.S. and Iran supporting the same people in Iraq, only to fight and and antagonize each other everywhere else in the world. But I guess things have changed since Trump has become president, because now Iran is officially an enemy in Iraq. But what's interesting is that this guy is going to have a really tough job. Like, that's got to be the worst prime minister job in the world right now.
Yep.
Like, that's the last job that you'd ever want to take. Like, you're becoming the new prime minister. You have social disorder, clear social disorder.
Right.
You have a regional power along with a superpower, both inserted into your country, who hate each other.
Right.
And you have to balance out those relationships. Your main source of revenue has declined
dramatically
because of low oil prices.
Right.
And most likely they're going to have to take an IMF. Like all these Middle Eastern countries that have always tried to, these countries that are either exporters of minerals or oil, besides Saudi Arabia, they're going to be forced to take more IMF loans. Iran took their first IMF loan ever,
even though they didn't need it
in decades and decades
according
and decades,
to them.
even though they essentially did not need it.
According to
them. But if Iraq takes another IMF loan, I believe this would be I think this would be their first one. That would come with conditions from the U.S. and those conditions are going to be anti-Iranian conditions.
Of course, yeah.
But on the flip side, if the U.S. wants Iraq to take a position against, Iran and the Iraqi militias that Iran sponsors, they're going to end up. The new prime minister, Kadhimi, he's going to end up losing support from his own parliament.
Right.
That also depends on Iran for energy.
Right.
So he's in a quagmire of all quagmires. That is going to be a tough job, but apparently he's pretty popular. And from the brief skimming I've done about him is that he comes, he's like known as somebody who gets the job done. He's not a bureaucrat type corrupt monster, but maybe he is.
Maybe he'll become one.
Maybe he is. We'll find out. Or
right.
I'm sure someone listening to it will be like, "Are you fucking kidding me? That guy is a piece of shit."
I mean, look, you brought up a good question. It's like, this guy get shit done. But my question is, like, what is he going to do first, right? What thing is he going to get done first? Like, where do you even start? I mean, obviously the oil prices, being on the brink of an IMF loan and being, like, supported by two antagonistic, powers, both regionally and internationally. And then on top of that, of course, there's the coronavirus stuff, which is not over yet. And Iran has a very, very bad problem there, which they share a border with. And I guess, like, to a lesser extent, there's, like, the fallout of the civil war in Syria, There's still terrorism in the region. Although I'm really curious to see, like, if terrorism has gone down.
It's actually been going up in Iraq. It's been
Really?
going up in Iraq lately. Yeah.
Huh. I guess
From
they don't
what
care
I've
for
been
the social
observing,
distancing, huh?
from what I've been seeing, that there actually has been, like, a spike in ISIS over the past couple of weeks.
I wonder why that is.
So, I couldn't tell you. Part of me will say that it's because they want to, because he has a good relationship with Iran. But, there's probably more to the story. It's probably just a pretty good time to move around if you're a jihadist, or if you're a jihadist militia.
Yeah, well,
if you want to go
locked up.
If you want to be an Occam's razor guy, this would be the time to move around the country unprovoked a little bit, or with a little less provocation.
Yeah.
But the main thing that I wanted to talk, and this kind of transitions into, like, the main topic of today's show, is what happened in Saudi Arabia today, where the United States, we're allies with Saudi Arabia, the Magic Kingdom, which is probably the better term, and that's
Magic Kingdom.
a term that the Magic Kingdom has been a term that has been used to describe them within the State Department for decades. They call it the Magic Kingdom. Not to be confused with the one in Orlando. This one is more magic. So the U.S. has a bunch of weapons and high-tech anti-aircraft systems to protect oil processing facilities and oil fields in the eastern part of Saudi Arabia, where all the oil fields are. And the reason to have them there is because, well, one of their processing facilities was bombed only about, 4 months ago at this point? I'm losing track of time. I completely lost track of time, so this may be
some
more
time
like
ago.
six.
Yeah.
I think about 6 months ago. It was the end of last year. There was an attack on a Saudi oil processing facility, their largest one. And
Aramco, right?
There was, Aramco, but that's their national oil company.
Right.
But there were two narratives that were going on at this time. Narrative one was that Iran did it, and Iran did it with a cruise missile, which honestly is feasible to me. Like, I still think that's probably sounds like it could have happened. The other narrative is that the Houthis did it with their
drones.
remote drones,
Right.
that they flew over the Saudi border. They flew over the border, and they were able to get behind and the processing facility and blow a big ass hole in it. And I guess the third narrative is that they both did it, but the Houthis claimed responsibility for doing it.
Right.
So there's that. They did say they did do it. There could be political reasons for that. Who knows? I think most likely they probably did it together. That's honestly kind of like what I think, that they were both involved in it. Iran denied it. The Houthis said they did do it, but I think they probably did it together. Now, what's interesting is that right now, I mean, there had just been an oil war between the U.S. and in Saudi Arabia and Russia, where Russia was producing more. Saudi wanted to produce them less. Saudi, being the biggest oil producer in the world, said, hey, you can't beat us at this game. And they started flooding the market. when they flooded the market. That hurt U.S. oil. Trump said stop. Then COVID-19 reached a new level, caused the demand of oil to go down. Then all of a sudden we have negative oil prices.
Right.
So with that, and with, this is really killing like the oil industry, in Texas and Louisiana, our domestic, fracking companies, our domestic energy companies. Those politicians of those states, they have an interest in protecting those industries. And Trump said to Mohammed bin Salman, he's like, hey, if you keep on pumping oil, if you don't cease the production of oil and start raising the prices, like usually, the big crises in our lifetime, not in our lifetime, we weren't born yet, but in the 70s, the problem was that they weren't pumping enough oil,
right.
That they had an embargo. Now it's the opposite. There's too much.
Mm-hmm.
There's too much. So Trump is like, hey man, I can't. If you guys are going to keep on pumping oil, I'm not going to be able to protect you from the politicians, the congressmen who represent these oil companies in these states. They're gonna go push for anti-Saudi legislation, and that's also, you got to take in mind that those are typically Republican states who are going to be more supportive of things like military interest in Saudi Arabia and Israel. So doing that was kind of risky politically in the U.S. Now, Trump made the decision to remove their Patriot missile systems from Saudi Arabia, which protect those fields and those facilities. And, to be completely honest, they're vulnerable. Like they've shown to be vulnerable. The reductions apparently, though, were based on an assessment that Tehran is no longer a threat to U.S. interest. That's the word. That's the word on the block.
Really? Just like that?
Yeah. Don't worry, they're not a threat anymore.
I mean, on the one hand, going back to the Houthi thing and
we just gotta worry about their proxies. All right. It's like on one hand, there's like two narratives. Like one narrative is like it whatever narrative fits the specific circumstance that they're in right now. Iran is a menace. They're destabilizing the Middle East. They're going to destroy the global oil supply. They're striking Aramco right from Tehran.
Now they're like, go for it. Destroy the.
They work hand in hand with their proxy networks and Hezbollah and the Houthis and Iran. And so on one hand, there's this threat that's causing so much terror in the Middle East, and I mean they definitely do have a lot of influence and do have a lot of militias that are traveling around, and I think that they're closer with the Houthis, or at least they had been closer with the Houthis more so than ever previous to the war in Yemen. However, it's just funny that you're taking these missile systems out of Saudi Arabia, saying that Tehran is no longer a threat to U.S. interest.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
you've been spending so much time pumping this big bad boy up, where it's like, why don't we put more Patriot missile systems in there? So,
and they've been moving troops. And
my
things
question
like that,
is this punishment? Is this punishment to Saudi Arabia?
For what? For the oil issue?
Yeah, for the oil issue. For not making production cuts in time to save oil, U.S. oil industries.
I mean, that seems likely. But I mean, like in practice, though, the Patriot missiles didn't really help Saudi Aramco facility when it got hit by apparently the Houthis, maybe the Iranians, maybe both. Like those Patriot missiles didn't do shit against that. So if it is a punishment, like how strong a punishment is it? It's more like symbolic, if anything.
We're taking our missile system elsewhere now.
Well, they really are.
Well, let's talk about because there's a pretty big, for people like us, who try to, recommend or endorse more responsible statecraft. We like the news of soldiers being moved out of the Middle East.
Right.
However, and that's a trend that's been going on in Afghanistan, in Saudi Arabia. Soldiers are leaving the Middle East, or at the very least being shuffled around. We're now closer than ever to an actual peace in Afghanistan, which is great. Now, in Saudi Arabia, though, I feel like this is more so a punishment. But can you now? You were doing research on this. Can you dive in here and explain maybe where these are going, or what's the deal with these Patriot missile systems and where they may end up in the world?
Well, I said that to you earlier today, more as a joke. So specifically, these Patriot missiles aren't necessarily going anywhere where about things that I want to talk about later. But it's ironic to see that we're pulling out land-based missile systems from the Middle East, specifically Saudi Arabia, when at the same time we are increasing our land-based missile systems elsewhere in the world, and that's in China. Now, specifically, we're definitely not moving those Patriot missiles from Saudi Arabia to like the Asia Pacific, but we are kind of boosting up our arms here. So there was a special report in Reuters here that claims that the U.S. is now basically rearming itself in the Asia Pacific theater. And they are doing this for a very specific reason, and it's to basically counter China's huge missile supremacy in the region. And I've had my finger on this pulse for a little while, but it has become very, very clear after reading this report and others that China might have a leg up on us in the short term. How much have you heard about this?
You're filling me in right here. I've been hearing about like the missile system movement, but I haven't heard the take that they have a leg up on us.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Do you mean a leg? Do you mean a leg up on us on just like what's on the ground there, or
yep?
Because the
ground.
U.S. Because what's Navy wise, like cruiser
I got some interesting stuff on Navy too, but it's all with a grain of salt. So let's maybe get started.
Well, can you explain just about U.S. naval supremacy in that area over the past couple of years at the very
forever.
least? Forever.
For our ever.
Starting with the casino ship that they purchased and turned it into a.
Okay, so fun. I'm jumping around a little bit here, but evidently, and this is true, China's got the biggest navy in the world right now. Right? They might not have the most well-equipped navy, but they have more vessels, right? Right now, and they're definitely bumping that up by a whole lot. I joked a while ago when we had a kind of conversation, a podcast about aircraft carriers, and I joked about China's carrier, because what they did when they got their hands on their first carrier, they didn't build one themselves. They actually purchased one from Ukraine, an old like Soviet style one, and it's one of those ones with the ski jump at the top, and the ski jump at the end is basically like an old archaic method to launch planes. Like you need a slope to get them off the ground. So they're not very effective. But the way that they purchased it was really funny, because they actually set up a shell corporation and lied to the Ukraine and said, "Oh, we're a casino company, and we're going to transform this old, aircraft carrier into a giant floating casino." And then they got it. And then they were like, psych, we're making this into an aircraft carrier. So they started retrofitting it. But because they lied, the Ukrainians aren't helping them, with logistics. And, they never had an aircraft carrier before. So they don't know how to fly and land and take off airplanes from an aircraft carrier. So these poor, like, Chinese, Air Force pilots, they have to simultaneously figure out how to do it and write the playbook on how to do it, which is fucking dangerous. If you ever think about how, just the act of landing or taking off, specifically landing, like you don't come in slow, you have to come in hot. and there's an arresting gear, basically like a little rope or whatever that kind of grabs the plane so that it doesn't go flying off the deck afterwards. And you're doing this on a ship that's moving through the sea, right? And sometimes wobbling about because of the waves. It's a very, very complex system, and I'm sure China would never admit to like crashing planes testing this out, but I can imagine that they fucked it up a few times before they figured it out, if they figured it out. Anyway, so they've been building up their navy for sure, and they're really trying to press their strength, especially in the southeast. What do they call that? The fucking East China Sea, South China Sea. Help me out here. It's the South China Sea. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, you're right.
But really, where their power is just kind of scary right now is with their intermediate and short medium range land-based missile launchers. So they have thousands of them, lots and lots and lots of them. And why is this a problem for us? Well, because their range allows them to strike our navy. It doesn't allow them to strike our mainland, but our super carriers, things like that, our carrier groups, any naval vessel, that comes anywhere close to their mainland is in striking range of these. And they've been setting up these fake ass islands in the South China Sea to like basically claim, sovereignty over them. And they just put missile launchers on them all over the place, like ground-based missile launchers. And that effectively gives them some strength in the region because, it used to be prior when, China or North Korea or, anyone in the region was acting up, we just sent a super carrier group over there and they shut up because, who wants a squadron of like, F-35s over their country? Like that's scary as shit. So the ground-based missile launchers, like these this is kind of a big struggle that we're having right now, because previously we've been in the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, or the INF, right? And this was between the United States and Russia, like post-Cold War, well, during Cold War, really. And it was a way to basically ban Russia and the U.S. from creating land and using land-based missiles, cruise missiles, and missile launchers that had a range of 500 to 1,000 kilometers, which is 300 to 600 miles, or short, medium-range ones, which have a range of 1,000 to 5,500 kilometers, which is 600 to 3,400 miles. And that's important because what they were trying to set up was a situation where, the U.S. wasn't creating a short-range missile or a medium-range missile that they can set up in, say, Germany or like the eastern states that we, like Ukraine or something like that, and do land-based nuclear strikes. And same thing for Russia, right? They didn't want Russia setting up, short-range or medium-range missile systems and hit parts of Eastern Europe or even Western Europe, for that matter. And so this treaty that we were in for a while basically prevented us from creating and developing and deploying these systems. Although I have a sneaking suspicion that we always had them in the first place, we always kept it super hush-hush. But kind of recently, Trump, in 2018, in October 2018, he decided to withdraw the U.S. from the treaty. And the reason why was because he said that the Russians weren't complying. He's probably right about that, but also it's a weak answer. And when it happened, I remember covering this and talking about it, and I was feeling pretty upset about it because I was like, why are we now just going to go ahead and increase our arms race? Like, that doesn't sound like a very good idea. But reading this again from the context of China, it's starting to make more sense. I still don't like it, but it's starting to make more sense because China wasn't in the INF, right? They weren't in this treaty. They were allowed to build as many fucking missiles as they wanted to. Medium, short, long, doesn't matter. They can make them because they weren't in this treaty. And so in that time, they've been able to amass a massive amount of these missile launchers. And, we talked a little bit when we were talking about like aircraft carriers and strike groups and things like that, a missile launcher with a 800-mile range could hit a cruise carrier strike group that's like way offshore. And because they can do that, it forces that carrier strike group to stay farther and farther away from the Chinese mainland, so that they're not in danger, right? The problem there is it kind of makes an aircraft carrier obsolete, because the airplanes that are on the aircraft carrier don't have enough range to fly 1,000 miles in both directions to do a sortie, right? So it kind of like renders our power there kind of not useless, but it definitely threatens it. And so China built up all these missiles, and it's really threatening the United States' like grip on the region in terms of like military power, especially in disputes of the South China Sea. And since pretty much August 2019, we formally withdrew from that and off to the races. Like we're at it. So apparently, the Pentagon wants to arm Marines with versions of the Tomahawk cruise missile, which is normally launched from U.S. warships, but they're putting it on like land-based launchers. And we're also developing a bunch of like long-range anti-ship missiles, both for air and sea. Basically, we're trying to take the tactics that China has been doing and turn it on their head, which is basically set up a bunch of fucking missiles in the region so that we can suppress their admittedly massive, not very well equipped Navy. What are your thoughts on that?
So I guess my question is, all right, so let me just make sure that I'm following you right now. So
sure.
This treaty that Trump left is the Obama treaty from 2010 with the U.S. and Russia.
The INF treaty?
Yeah.
Are
we talking about the New START treaty?
No. The INF treaty started in 1987, in December 1987, and it was signed by
I thought you were
Reagan
referring
and Gorbachev.
To the treaty with Obama.
No.
And
we pulled out of that one too.
I got confused. No, we did pull out of that one, but
now, so Reagan and Gorbachev signed this treaty in 87 to basically say, like, all right, let's chill out on making intermediate range nuclear missile launchers, like ground-based missiles. It conveniently did leave out like air-based and naval-based ones, but there were just like no ground-based ones.
So, like, what is in the Chinese Navy? Like, how are they ill-equipped?
Well,
like,
they're
explain
ill-equipped.
to me, like, what?
Yeah, so, and this is largely my opinion, but it's based on, like, information that I've been reading about, but they're ill-equipped because, one, they don't have nuclear-powered, like, vessels, right? So, a big strength of our strike groups, as an example, is that, they can go on largely indefinitely. Like, they would have to stop and get, like, supplies and shit every now and again, but they can go on for a very, very long time. And nuclear-powered, as an example, attack submarines are quiet. They're very, very quiet, as opposed to very, very noisy, diesel-powered or diesel-electric Chinese subs, right? So while they might have more vessels, like more people, more units in the sea, they've got frigates and destroyers and battleships and things like that. They have one aircraft carrier, which, as we just pointed out, is old and ill-equipped. And I think they're building a second one right now. But where they have strength a lot is in their littoral class ships, LITTORAL, which is like, close to the shore range ships. So they're not like deep water ships. I mean, they could go into deep waters, but they operate in the in and around the shoreline to defend themselves. But by the time we get that close, we're also in range of all of their intermediate range missile systems. Like, so we're fucked. We can't really get that close to their shores. Now, they're ill-equipped because the armaments on those ships, their propulsion systems, and just the technology that they have around them is just in open blue sea, like in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, they're going to get wrecked by the United States. But close to shore, where they have cover from their missile launchers, like they can do some damage, and they've got a lot of ships. Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense. So I mean,
like,
they just the volume is going to do enough damage to, at the very least, have some regional influence and some regional influence in their own waters.
right, we're not going to fuck with them, like in regional waters, and this is
Well, I
especially
mean,
important.
the whole like there's no military solution with China. Like,
Well,
there's a bunch of flexing solutions, but there's no actual military solution between both the U.S. and China. They're both nuclear armed. They both have nuclear warheads. There's not going to be a realistic invasion or fight between U.S. over some stupid island in the South Pacific. I would highly doubt it. And I mean, if there's not a military solution in Iran, there's no military solution in China, and the chances are, if China wanted to declare war on the U.S., they would just stop lending us money.
I mean, they don't really have that much of our debts. They really don't.
They do have a high percentage of our bonds, of our treasury bonds.
They can dump the bonds, but
if the U.S. default, let's just say if because a lot of senators are like Lindsey Graham, I heard him the other day. He was like, the U.S. should just default on our loans to China. Oh, I think like a lot of these people are proposing two things: defaulting on our loans, on our debt to China, which would, I mean, I think that would hurt the value of a dollar, right? Because less people would want to buy dollars, knowing that the U.S. could default on their debt. Like, it would just make it more risky in the long run. And then also they said they were talking about having individual families or individual lawsuits against China, like how we had individual lawsuits against Saudi Arabia.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, nations are supposed to have immunity because
from individual lawsuits, right?
From individual lawsuits, mainly because it's impossible to have a fair court.
Right.
Like, you can't.
Who's going to preside?
You can't
over that,
sue.
Right?
You can't sue China because there's going to be a bias in both systems. Like, there can't be a Chinese lawsuit against an American government because the Chinese, the bias from the whatever government or whatever court is going to be so strongly in the home nation. So, I mean, that's why why countries have sovereign immunity. So I don't think those are actual solutions. Maybe flexing nuts is something that we could do, but I mean, I don't think that the U.S. is going to go to war. I think
on the contrary. So while I agree, and I think that we definitely don't have like an all-out war plan, like that would never work out. I mean, it wouldn't work out with Iran. Why would it work out with China? What we do have are active plans that we're doing right now to put military pressure on China, and they have similar plans against us. So right now, what we're doing is we're trying to put missiles, ground-based launch missiles, to counter their missiles, and basically do the same thing that they're doing, but in their home court, right? So right now that we're completely unchanged from the INF treaty, we can build these missiles, we can deploy these missiles, and obviously we have strong ties with Japan, we have fairly strong ties with Taiwan, but also we're looking to move into a lot of the archipelago islands around Chinese coastal waters. So places like the Philippines they're all going after those islands and shit. And so what the plan right now is to stockpile a bunch of missiles, like in the short term. I think they're trying to buy 53 of these Tomahawk missiles, ground-based Tomahawk missiles, for the Marines to deploy. Apparently they're going to be like mini ship killers, which is interesting because it feels like they're taking a page out of the Millennium Challenge and saying, instead of having these large warships, we're just going to do small amphibious assault ships and launch ship-killing missiles at them, which is interesting. But if the United States goes through with its plan, basically what they're going to do is line the coastal waters in the areas that we have like influence over with ground-based intermediate range missiles, which would effectively combat their navy, their large navy, and it puts the same pressure on them as it does on us in terms of like how we can operate in those waters. So it would rebalance the scales there a bit. Now, China's trying to do the same exact thing, right? So China just recently conducted an exercise outside of Taiwan. So in the south and east of Taiwan, they did major military exercises with their navy, basically flexing their dick muscles there, showing off that like they can do whatever the fuck they want in the area. And kind of Taiwan.
So let me just like make sure that I'm following you and other people are following you as well.
Sure.
The U.S. and China are basically kind of scrambling for land to put weapons on.
Yep, 100%.
And China has been making
doing it.
They've been building islands from scratch,
just to do that.
Just to put weapons on them.
Correct.
All right. So they're in a scramble. Or I guess a scramble would be the best way to say it for any land that they can take, like what,
or that they can influence.
Okay, so what is the U.S. looking for? What is China looking for? Just anything that is that they can get some type of influence, either through their their monetary system or whatever influence that a government can put on a smaller nation.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the main like first island chains that the United States is eyeing to start putting missiles is in the control or in the sphere of the Philippines. But we're having a little bit of trouble with that actually on this first phase because the president Rodrigo Duterte, he's basically been distancing himself from the United States policy and forming closer ties with China, both economically and on other points. And this is pretty important because there are some strategically important like islands in the Philippines that we could be utilizing to secure shipping routes, but also just to be able to like do military operations around. So, right now Duterte is like the first big obstacle for the United States in terms of this plan to start arming the shit out of these islands surrounding China with intermediate range missiles. So if we can't figure that out, it might be kind of difficult. Other options are...
It sounds like World War II.
It does. It honestly really does, which it scares me a bit because, like I understand the strategy and I understand like the United States... I wouldn't say we feel threatened by it, but we feel less powerful and they want to tip the scales back towards the United States. But I think it's dangerous what they're doing because... and I hate like siding with China on this, but the one guy, let me try and find this quote.
Well, I'll add basically like all the foreign policy realists / war hawks, like the people who consider themselves, I would say, a foreign policy realist who go by that definition. They've all been saying like, we got to get our guys out of the Middle East and put them in Asia. Right. China is the real menace right here. Right. It's not the Arabs or the Muslims. It's the Chinese and the Russians. We need to start diverting our troops and our power from the Middle East, from Qatar and from the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz to the South Pacific to combat China's spread over there. Right. And prevent them from building new islands and from becoming the new Japanese empire. Right.
And I found that quote, and it's hard to argue against this particular line of logic, but Chinese foreign ministry drew a distinction between the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, arsenal of missiles and the planned U.S. deployment. It said Chinese missiles were located in its territory, especially short and medium range missiles, which cannot reach the mainland of the United States. This is fundamentally different from the U.S., which is vigorously pushing forward deployment. In other words, we're pushing to put missile launchers in not our territory that can hit them. Right? So we're kind of the aggressors here in that respect.
But if there's a radar system that goes into a sovereign country's territory, doesn't that cause a bunch of legal problems?
Well, it's not a radar system; it's a missile system. Of course, there's radar associated to, but we're not talking about like Patriot missiles where it's looking to defend a particular point, right? These are offensive missiles, right? These are ground-based missile launchers that have a range between, let's say, 300 and 1,000 miles, right? And these devices can be set up in these like archipelagos, in these islands off the coast of China, and be able to hit mainland China, but more importantly, be able to hit naval assets in the sea, in the seas around the coast of China. And China isn't like that very much, and their logic makes sense. They're saying, hey, you guys, we weren't a part of the IMF. Like, we could build whatever we want, and we built it, and we kept it on our mainland to protect ourselves, right, as a deterrence for ourselves. You guys, on the other hand, just dropped out of that treaty and are now suddenly deciding to put a bunch of missile launchers on our doorstep. Fuck you guys. I'm not trying to side with China here, but the logic is pretty strong.
Well, what do you think of this? So I got confused earlier, but the reason why I was confused is because I was reading about the New START with the Obama deal with Russia. Mm-hmm. So that's expiring in 7 months.
Right.
What Trump wants to do is that he wants to include China into that deal, and this is a nuclear deal.
Right.
It is an arms control deal, which would essentially, it would limit the amounts of nuclear arms, but China's stockpile is not even close to the size of Russia or the United States.
No, but they also don't have restrictions on building more either. So, like, generally speaking, I'd have to read the contents of the deal that they're trying to iron out. And in most cases, I think a lot of the deals that they try to iron out are fucking stupid. But the general idea to impose more like nuclear arms restrictions sounds like a good fucking idea to me.
But it's just the incentive wouldn't really be there for China as much because their stockpile, because they're going to put limits that obviously China is going to be way below.
Right.
And they're not going to put limits that are going to, debilitate our own nuclear arsenal to a point.
I mean, it's possible that those limits would be relative to the country, So, like, our limits would be higher than China's limits because we already have more than you do, It's possible that they draw up something like that. But there's no way that China would agree with it.
Trump seems to be very keen on getting them in this deal. He wants them in this deal.
I mean, without reading it, like without reading the contents, I kind of support this because right now there's a lot of escalation. And, we've been talking about the American plans, to combat China, but, this new report came out recently. This is the kind of the last thing that I wanted to talk about. But there's an internal Chinese report that China's basically facing a Tiananmen-like global backlash over the coronavirus. And they're actively planning contingency plans up to and including armed conflict with the United States. So it's not just us. They're thinking about it too. This whole pandemic has been pretty crazy, and basically they're saying that the rising wave of hostility of the coronavirus outbreak could, push them to armed conflict with the United States. And so it was originally drawn up by this organization called the Institutes of Contemporary International Relations.
That sounds like some neocon shit right now.
It is. It's like Chinese neocon shit.
So like, no, it's like on the U.S. side though, because, the U.S. is China is so embarrassed and they're facing so much hostility because they did coronavirus that they feel like they're backed. They're like a fox backed in a corner, and they're gonna end up lashing out. So we got to take them out now. That's what it sounds like to me on my side. Yeah, I'm sure China has their own hawks as well, their own like people who think of unreasonable solutions for what they need to deal with right now. Because I mean, frankly, the virus did come out of there. I think that what they're really gonna suffer is the they're the manufacturing powerhouse that's in China is going to transition to countries in Southern Asia. I think that's going to be a long-term consequence. Like Vietnam will benefit from this. Maybe Cambodia will benefit from this.
Yeah,
in the
likely.
South, in the South. Like those are going to be the main benefactors because people are not going to want to have their manufacture iPhones and manufacture shit there.
I mean, likely, but again, I want to point out that this is like an internal like document. This is like their neocons talking about this. So that, again, the institute is the China Institutes of Contemporary International Relations. I'm never going to say that again. It's basically a think tank. And it's affiliated with the Ministry of State Security, which is China's top intelligence agency. It happened early last month. They presented their findings to top leaders, including their president, Xi Jinping. Basically said that anti-Chinese sentiment is at its highest since 1989, which was the Tiananmen Square crackdown. And it basically called for the need to be prepared for a worst case scenario for like an armed confrontation with the United States. And basically, like, the United States has been putting a lot of pressure on China. I don't think this is unfounded conclusion. We've been saying for even before the coronavirus that they've been doing unfair trade practices, unfair technology practices. We've been disputing with them over Hong Kong and Taiwan, and territories in the South China Sea.
Corporate espionage.
Yeah, I mean,
predatory. Well, that's not even predatory lending, but that's more like in African countries and European countries.
Right.
But there's a lot of things. Obviously, there. What's going on in Hong Kong with them trying to extradite? Did you know that Animal Crossing was banned there? Side note.
Yeah, it was because people were using the message boards inside of it to like do anti-Chinese like shit, which I think is really funny that they that their free speech is so repressed that people have to take to Animal Crossing to get the message across.
China's war on cartoon animals.
Well, I mean, they already have one war against one cartoon animal. It's Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah, Winnie the Pooh. So they have to continue that war.
That and Peppa the Pig. They don't like Peppa the Pig either. I don't know why. I forget about that one.
They just think he's a disgusting animal.
Anyway, and so like kind of continuing on that, like Trump has been talking about raising, tariffs, new tariffs on China. His administration has been considering doing some other retaliatory measures against China because of the outbreak. You mentioned one before, defaulting on Chinese loans. There's a whole suite of shit. So I don't think that necessarily they're wrong about the anti-Chinese sentiment. They're definitely getting a lot of it. Where I think they're wrong is like their proposal to, consider armed conflict with the United States. I think that'd be fucking terrible.
Well, here's the thing, though. There's so much market interest in China still.
Right.
Where you have the NBA making deals in China and you have Disney making deals in China. There's so much corporate interest in China because there's billions of people there that are potential consumers of your products.
Right.
I think that interest will that corporate interest would honestly prevent a hostile military action.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't think think there's necessarily a lobby the MIC is always pushing for more weapon sales, but
right.
I don't think even they really want a actual conflict with China just because it would be so harsh.
Maybe, but there's another dimension, like a deeper dimension that I think we're not really discussing, and that's the Belt and Road Infrastructure Development Project that China's doing. There's a huge consumer base in China, and there could be corporate interests that would dissuade Chinese military, offensive or defensive, frankly, against the United States. But more importantly, China's getting anti-China sentiment from outside of the United States as well, right? And their big infrastructure project, the Belt and Road project that we've discussed over several different podcasts, and just to catch you up in case you weren't, you're just joining us for the first time, basically China wants to recreate the Silk Road, right? And what they're doing is they're creating huge infrastructure projects to link up through land bridges, Henry's favorite word, roads, across Central Asia and through to Europe, so that they can establish better supply chain, better, like global exporting, because they're a huge export economy. And right now, how they export things is like if they want to export something to Europe, they have to like fucking swim all the way around,
Literally
under
swim.
Yeah, they swim over all the way under like India and shit, and like go up either around Africa or through the Straits. So it takes a fucking long time, right? It would be just much easier to set up like a rail system or like a trucking road system straight through like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, other Central Asian countries, and then just get right into Turkey and like fly right into Europe. That would be economically more viable to them, and they're investing billions, if not trillions, of dollars on this initiative. And if they're getting hit from all over the place, including the United States, but other countries as well, it threatens this. Right? And they're very, very threatened right now in this report that Washington is going to step up our financial support and military support for their regional allies, which would make their security situation, but also their project kind of volatile. And so there is historical precedent for this too. After the Tiananmen Square aftermath, the U.S. and a lot of Western governments imposed huge sanctions against China, including banning or restricting arms sales to China, and banning technology transfers. Right. So if we take this in summation, right, anti-Chinese sentiment because of coronavirus, really threatens not only just from the United States, but kind of from a global perspective. And it's not just because they have consumers, but it's because they're investing heavily in infrastructure projects outside of their country to bolster their export economy, right? And if that is at all, if the confidence in that is at all undermined, it really fucking throws a wrench in their system, which is backing them into a corner, and they are thinking about armed conflict with the United States because of it. It's pretty nuts, and they've been doing all they can right now to propagandize that they're somehow the heroes of this. I mean, they've been trying to basically prop up their propaganda around the fact that they're donating a lot and that they're selling medical supplies, to the United States, but also, other countries, and like sharing their doctors and their expertise on the virus. And they're trying to like do a bit of PR there.
I mean, they went and they saved Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, apparently they did.
He's alive, by the way.
He's alive because of them.
Spoiler alert. You don't have to listen to our last episode now.
Yeah.
Well,
it's all bullshit. Don't listen to it.
we said that he wasn't dead, like 2 minutes into it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely knew he wasn't dead. There was no way that he was dead, and we didn't know about it already. But yeah, I mean, this is like real shit that's going on right now in China. And between COVID-19 and between us pulling out our missiles from Saudi Arabia and basically, in a nutshell, moving them to Asia Pacific, it's kind
diverting them somewhere and then putting more missiles there. We don't know if they're the same missile systems.
No, they're definitely
the same
not.
Serial numbers, but let's just, for the visualization, let's just paint it that way, where they actually shipped those forces like in a board game or something. Like, I will take my piece and move it to
Knight to E4.
Oh man, I watched the entire marathon of that the other day.
Yeah,
and it was honestly pretty great. Does not get hit. Does not ever get tired.
No, definitely.
Yeah, man, that's fucking is kind of crazy.
We'll see what comes out of it.
We'll see what happens. We'll see if a war breaks out. Hey, if a war breaks out, we'll let you guys know.
Yeah,
you'll hear it here
first. To hear
first.
about it.
You'll hear it from bro history first if there's a war between U.S. and China.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's so right now I'm in a position where I'm still like, I think we're all in this position. Nobody knows what's going on, even in their respective industries and fields. Like, you could be a practicing, a primary care doctor who does not know what the fuck's going to happen to your practice or to your industry, and you're in healthcare.
Right.
The banks don't know
They have
what
no
the
fucking
fuck is
clue.
going. They have no. So I want to do a quick follow up on some of the episodes that we've been doing regarding a lot of the loans and the stimulus packages that the U.S. has been giving out. So there was this New York Times article that was released today, and it's titled, "Small Business Counting on Loan Forgiveness Could Be Stuck with Debt." And I'm sure you guys are if you've been listening to the past couple episodes, we've been talking a lot about these PPP loans, these paycheck protection loans that have been part of the stimulus package and been given to banks to give to businesses that are currently locked down to pay their staff. But essentially, they're supposed to be grants if those companies, those businesses, use that money to pay their staff, even though they're not at work. So you're like, you're paying for no productivity. So there's been a couple of issues that are outlined in this article. One of the first issue that jumps out to me, which we discussed, is that people are making more money on unemployment right now than they would in these service industry jobs. So they don't want to go back to work, first of all. Mm-hmm. So it's like, no, we don't want to go back. Like, what's the point? Like, I rather get money. Let me wait till the unemployment dries out, and then I'll go back to work. But now so first of all, the banks don't even know what's going on, because they were the amount of applications that have been going into these banks to get these loans have been so astronomical that a lot of these smaller community banks that have been issuing out these loans don't have the infrastructure to actually deal with this. So there's like no application process. There's no like really underwriting process for these loans. Now, what's ambiguous is the requirements to not get, I guess, penalized from the federal government, because
not get dinged.
You're getting money that is supposed to be a grant that's supposed to go to your employees, and at 70% I think is supposed to go to the employees, and then 30% can go to other expenses. That might be impossible, because you're supposed to pay those employees in a certain period of time. The date runs up in the next in the next week, so you have a finite period of time to pay these employees. And again, there's no really guideline, and business owners are not sure what they're doing, if it's illegal or not. And apparently, all these businesses that are going to be getting these loans are going to be audited too. So they're like, what the fuck do we do? So what they're doing, a lot of businesses are doing right now, is that they're getting these loans and they're just putting them in their bank account, and they're probably just going to give them back. They're not even going to use the loan. So they're just going to take the debt and they're going to pay it back, because they don't know what to do, and just not hire their staff back until the lockdown is over. But then by at that point, like, there probably won't be enough demand for employment for those people to get their jobs back at their previous employer. So it's just this paycheck protection program is a complete shit show. It's a shit show. And I think anyone should have fucking saw how big of a shit show this was going to be, because of how fast they did it. Like, all right, everyone's locked down there, get money, give them trillions of dollars. All right, $500 billion to work. All right, give them another $300 billion. It's just like just tossing money and just throwing money at these problems. And I mean, first of all, a lot service-based businesses typically are paychecks away, are rent checks away from going out of business.
Right.
Like the profit margins in the restaurant or the retail industry, or a lot of these small businesses that people are kind of thinking of when they think of, like, getting bailed out because it's not their fault. It's very, very, you and I both know that most of these businesses fail anyway. And sometimes it's not of their own fault. It's just a very, very competitive market in the restaurant industry, in the service industry, in the hotel industry, in the hospitality. They're very competitive markets with low margins. So a lot of these people who are taking out these loans are going to be stuck with the debt in the long run. And even if they pay out their employees over this time, when doors do open and when there's less lockdown restrictions, they're going to have, from what it looks like, no one knows for sure. Who knows? Maybe there's a miracle of people wanting to go to restaurants when this is all over.
Honestly, have you been outside recently? It feels like there's a miracle for people wanting to go anywhere right now.
That's fair enough. I'm sure there's going to be some businesses that make ahead. Like they're gonna make a lot of money. I think it's gonna be a lot of businesses that appeal to younger demographics are going to be the ones that are going to really do well. Maybe that have a lower price on the menu, or not. Like a place that has a $18 glass of wine will probably not do as well as a place with like $5 Bud Lights. Not a dollar menu, but like I think the places that are going to do well are going to be like the divey kind of bars that people go to grab drinks or watch games and things like that. Especially if this happens before football season, I think those types of restaurants will rebound. I think the ones that will fail will be like the ones with like super high prefix menus. Like I don't think that people are going to want to go to those or want to spend the money on those. But who knows? I mean,
look. You
gotta. I guess you could look at the industries that did well after the recession, our last major recession, and see how they bounce back. But I mean, this is a whole different animal because it's, this is a pandemic virus, not just the recession.
Right.
I don't know. It's crazy, man.
My 2 cents on this is like, I know that you and I don't totally agree on the money that we've used to stimulate our economy and make sure that it doesn't completely bust. I think we both agree on the way that it was carried out. Like I would agree that we're like, we understood we needed to put money to solve some of these problems. But just like how they decided to do it was a fucking nightmare. And I think part of this problem, again, I'm not an economist, but part of the problem for me is that, these PPP loans were basically like trickle down economics, at a massive scale with a massive, with a velocity that was just ridiculous. Right. So they were just like, we will give you, business, a loan, and you must pay your people the money, most of it, by I don't know what date, and also maybe you don't owe us, but maybe you do. So like the incentives on paying your employees was unclear. The parameters and the rules there was unclear, but the idea was, if we give these loans to these businesses, then they can pay their people, and then the people ultimately don't lose their jobs and they can have financial security. They should have just skipped the middleman and said, if you're a person, here's some money. And if you're a business and you just need to keep your doors open, like pay your basic bills, here's money for that. Not like try to funnel the money to the people through the business. That was, in my opinion, doomed to fail.
I mean, if they were going to do anything, you might as well just put money in people's pockets.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Straight up in people's pockets.
Yeah, like just put it. If you were going to put a stimulus bill, and like not have like these. And I'm not saying I'm endorsing this. I'm just saying this would be better than the system that we put in place.
Exactly.
Like you might as well just put a bigger stimulus check in someone's bank account,
right?
Based off what their
or just a more consistent stimulus check,
rather rather than like have this go through bank with like a kind of a weird application process. And there's so many different types of businesses that you don't know what businesses are actually closed down or what can't do work. And there's other businesses that have independent contractors that work for them and don't have full-time staff, but the independent contractors may as well be their staff because they could be hired and fired at any time. Like they still report to that person. Like,
it's like, do you pay them? Do you not pay them? Like what?
You don't pay, like they're being. So it's just such a shit show. And to top it all off is that a lot of like large companies, there's publicly traded companies have applied for these loans as well. And we went over this, I think 2 episodes ago. We went over all the bullshit of like all these like companies that are either
cheaters,
have been public companies, cheaters, have been had fraudulent activity, who have lied to investors regarding their
financial
returns,
health,
financial health, have received money for these loans. And when they got some of them, like a company like Shake Shack, which has 1 million locations, that does pretty well, and you would think would have some savings, a rainy day savings for a crisis like this. They ended up being humiliated and having to give the money back. A lot of businesses are going through that process, but it's too easy to take advantage of because everyone's going to want to get a piece of that pie. Most larger banks are going to prefer their larger customers as well. So a Bank of America or a Chase, they're going to prioritize their business accounts that are
doing well.
That are doing well. So as far as like these mom and pop shops, like Jim's Subways or Jim's Subways, Jim's Subs, or Jim's Meatball Shop. I'm making up a generic restaurant name. I'm having a tough job. They're going to have to go through probably a different process than where they would normally get a loan. And it's like it's going to be tough. Like it's going to be like a whole new process
and the employees of Jim's Meatball Shop are like, at the very bottom of this terrible shitty stick, because what do? Will Jim pay them? Won't Jim pay them? It really just depends on how Jim does at his bank. And if Jim gets the money from his bank, does Jim know that he doesn't have to pay that money back later? Can Jim effectively pay out all of his employees in time to meet the minimum requirements?
And is that enough for the lockdown?
Exactly.
Like
it
that's
isn't
like
enough.
how we don't even know when Jim's Subway can open again. So what does it matter if he pays them for a month or two?
Right.
Like what does it fucking matter if they're not going to get a paycheck down the road? Like it makes no fucking sense. Like this whole fucking bill, this whole fucking plan, it was retarded. Like I just don't get it. Like I understand the need to act. Like politicians are going to want to act when there's a crisis, and you're going to want to be like, okay, we got to put some type of funnel money into pockets and all this stuff. But they did it in such a dumb way.
Yeah.
It did make it more complicated, where people are scared to even use the money. Like it's just a joke.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, honestly, like you said, the easiest way would have just been putting money in people's pockets, which is what I was in favor of the entire time. And it looks like actually they're trying to draw up another multi-billion, perhaps $1 trillion bill for a second wave of stimulus. And apparently the Republicans are obviously trying to block this, but they won't sign off on anything because Trump wants to include a payroll tax cut for this, which when you just like think about that for a minute, like how the fuck would a payroll tax cut help people when people are out of work? Like, like if you're not getting a paycheck, how is that supposed to benefit you? So just really fucking stupid.
It's government, man. It's government. Like what do you think they're gonna think of? Like they're not gonna think of like something well thought of. It's politicians need to act and look good, so they make very, very tough choices very quickly without much research, and that's how you get these inefficient spending bills. It's basically like this is my favorite analogy. I heard it from Peter Schiff. It's like taking a blood transfusion from your left arm and putting it into your right arm, and then spilling blood as you move the syringe. Like, it's just I don't know. I'm kind of just speechless and very frustrated about what's going on. And
a listener here, or a viewer, Bora, says, should I invest in war stocks? Probably.
I mean, war stocks always go up. I mean, yeah, why not invest in
Boeing,
Lockheed Martin,
Raytheon, Lockheed
Hey,
Martin.
look, hey, Boeing is perfect. Boeing is getting bailed out.
Right.
And guess what? Boeing's planes fall out of the sky. So if you call that fucking bulletproof, like, the Lockheed Martin's F-35 costs $1.4 trillion. That weapons program, $1.4 trillion. $1.4 trillion program. And there's been many issues with those planes. Like, many issues with those planes.
Nevertheless, I bet if we looked at their stock right now, it's probably fine.
What is it?
Let's find out. I can tell you right now.
And you know what? Here's another thing. I was watching CNBC, and bald head Kevin O'Leary comes on from Shark Tank, Mr. Wonderful.
Oops. Looks like we had some technical difficulties. Apparently my mic unplugged, and you're not going to hear the last 10 minutes of this episode. But if you're interested and you want to hear us rant about Kevin O'Leary and our opinions about buying war stocks, you should check us out on YouTube and watch the live stream there. As always, like, share, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast if you're on Apple. We'll see you guys next week.